What if I told you that one of the greatest cities of antiquity was destroyed not only by the most powerful empire in the world, but also by its own defenders? In 70 AD, Roman legions, under the command of the future emperor Titus, surrounded the holy city of Jerusalem. But what they found inside was not a unified fortress, but a battlefield where different factions were destroying each other with greater ferocity than they were fighting their common enemy. This is not a story of simple conquest. It is a story of how internal division, fanaticism, and the struggle for power can destroy a nation from within, doing half the work for the invaders. The siege turned into a tragedy of self-destruction, the smoke from which could be seen for many miles. Watch the video to the end to find out how Rome wiped out not just a city, but the very foundation of an ancient faith, and why this conflict changed the course of world history. What the old archives hide sheds light on the true cause of this conflict. The great Jewish uprising of 66 AD did not erupt out of nowhere. It was the result of decades of growing tension between Rome and the province of Judea. The Roman administration often misunderstood or deliberately ignored the deep religious foundations of the local population. The appointment of procurators who were more interested in personal enrichment than in maintaining order only added fuel to the fire. Jewish society at that time was itself divided. There were different factions, from the aristocratic Sadducees, who were ready to cooperate with Rome, to the Pharisees, who tried to preserve their faith under the new conditions. But a third radical force entered the political scene, the Zealots. They took an uncompromising stance, considering any authority other than divine to be illegitimate and calling for open-armed resistance. It was the actions of the Zealots and their more radical offshoots, such as the Sicarii, that became the catalyst for war. They saw any compromise as betrayal and any moderate leader as an enemy no better than a Roman. Their daring raids and attacks on Roman garrisons and citizens loyal to Rome made a peaceful settlement impossible. Moderate voices calling for caution were drowned out by war cries. The Roman Empire, which ruled the world from Britain to Egypt, could not afford to show weakness. Any uprising in one province could serve as an example to others. Emperor Nero, known for his eccentricity, took the news from Judea very seriously. He did not simply want to suppress the rebellion. He wanted to teach a lesson that would be remembered for generations to come. To accomplish this task, he chose one of his best commanders, a man who did not seek glory, but was known for his methodical approach and iron grip. That man was Titus Flavius Vespasian. His appointment meant that Rome was moving from police measures to full-scale, systematic warfare. Vespasian arrived in the east with 3 legions and a clear order: to pacify Judea at any cost. The initial stage of the campaign was concentrated in the north, in Galilee. Vespasian moved slowly but surely, capturing one city after another. He did not seek quick but risky victories, preferring to wear down his enemy and systematically deprive him of resources. The resistance was fierce but disorganized. Dispersed rebel groups were no match for the disciplined Roman military machine. It was in Galilee that the Romans encountered one of the rebel leaders, who would later become the chief chronicler of this war, Joseph ben Mattathias. His fortress, Jotapata, held out longer than the others, demonstrating wonders of ingenuity. When defeat became inevitable, Joseph was among the few survivors who were taken prisoner by the Romans. This moment became a turning point in his life. Instead of sharing the fate of the other prisoners, Joseph used his gift of persuasion. He appeared before Vespasian and, as they say, predicted his imperial power. Vespasian, being superstitious, spared his life. Thus, the future historian Josephus became a witness at the Roman headquarters, gaining a unique opportunity to observe the war from both sides. While Vespasian methodically cleaned up the north and the coast, Jerusalem remained the ultimate goal. the city was the main stronghold, symbol, and heart of the uprising. Everyone understood that the decisive battle would take place at its walls. Zealots and other radical groups flocked to Jerusalem, seeing it as the last stronghold and the site of the coming decisive battle. This influx of radical fighters from other regions changed the balance of power within the city itself. They did not trust the local aristocracy and priests, considering them too moderate and prone to surrender. Jerusalem was turning into a boiling pot, where internal conflicts were becoming as dangerous as the approaching Roman army. We would be very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about the role of internal conflicts in the fate of great states? Write about it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Are you ready to learn the truth about how political chaos in Rome directly affected the fate of Jerusalem? While Vespasian was campaigning in Judea, a full-scale crisis erupted in the heart of the empire. In 68 AD, a rebellion broke out against Emperor Nero. Having lost the support of the army and the Senate, Nero was declared an enemy of the state and forced to commit suicide. His departure ended the Julio-Claudian dynasty and plunged Rome into a bloody struggle for power. This period went down in history as the year of the four emperors. After Nero, Galba, Otho, and Vitellius ascended and were deposed in quick succession. Each of them was a puppet of different legions, and the empire plunged into civil war. The legions that were supposed to guard the borders now marched against each other. For Vespasian in Judea, this was a sign. The campaign in Judea was temporarily suspended. With a powerful army and the support of the eastern provinces, Vespasian was the ideal candidate to stabilize the situation. He was an experienced military leader who did not belong to the corrupt Roman nobility and was respected by his soldiers. The legions in Egypt, Syria, and Judea proclaimed him emperor. For Vespasian, this meant that his main battle would now be in Italy, for Rome itself, rather than in Judea. He abandoned the Jerusalem campaign and went to Alexandria to control the grain supply to Rome, a key lever of pressure. He then moved on to the capital, where his supporters had already defeated Vitellius' forces. By the end of 69, Vespasian had become the undisputed ruler of the Roman Empire, founding the new Flavian dynasty. But the war in Judea remained unfinished. Vespasian could not lead it personally as emperor. He entrusted this task to his eldest son, Titus. For Titus, this was not just a military order, it was his chance. He was about 30 years old, ambitious, charismatic, and had already proven his competence commanding a legion under his father. Ending the Jewish war had now become a matter of honor for the new dynasty. It had to be a resounding victory that would consolidate the Flavians' power and show the whole world that order had been restored in the empire. Titus was given the best legions and resources. He received not just an army, but a punitive instrument of incredible power. Titus approached the task with enthusiasm. He assembled 4 legions, the V Macedonic, the X Rapid, the Thoicene Lightning, and the 5th Team Apollinaris. It was one of the largest armies ever assembled by Rome for a single siege. In addition to the legionaries, the army included a huge number of auxiliary troops from allied provinces, engineers, artillerymen, and siege specialists. While Titus was gathering his forces and preparing for the final assault on Jerusalem, the city's defenders gained a precious respite. A year of civil war in Rome gave them time to strengthen their defenses and prepare for the inevitable. However, instead of uniting in the face of a common enemy, the rebel leaders used this time for something completely different. Inside Jerusalem, there was not just division, but a full-blown civil war. Various factions of zealots and other groups fought for control of the city. The streets became an arena of battle, where supporters of one leader fought against supporters of another. Moderate residents who tried to negotiate peace were declared traitors and eliminated. When Titus approached the city in the spring of 70, he was well aware of what was happening inside. His intelligence reported chaos and infighting. It was an ideal situation for him. He understood that his opponents were weakening themselves, and he only needed to finish what had been started. But while Titus was assembling the most powerful army the East had ever seen, his main allies were already inside the city walls. In the next chapter, we will learn how Jerusalem's internal enemies did the work for the Romans, committing an act that sealed the city's fate long before the first Roman stone struck the wall. This is what happens behind closed doors when fanaticism replaces common sense. While Titus and his legions were just beginning their march on Jerusalem, a tragedy was unfolding within the city walls that would be the main cause of the city's downfall. Jerusalem was not just a fortress. It was divided into three warring factions, each led by a charismatic but ruthless leader. The first was Johanan of Gischala. He fled to Jerusalem from Galilee after Vespasian's victories. John was cunning, eloquent, and possessed an unyielding will. He gathered thousands of loyal fighters, zealots around him, and controlled the outer courts of the temple, turning the holiest place into his personal stronghold. He advocated war until victory, rejecting any negotiations. His main opponent was Simon Shimon Bar Giora. This leader was even more radical and cruel. He came to Jerusalem from the countryside at the head of a huge army, attracting all the discontented and desperate to his side. Simon controlled most of the lower city and part of the upper city. He was popular among the common people, promising liberation from both Roman rule and the local aristocracy. The third force was the remnants of the original Jerusalem zealots led by Eleazar ben Simon. They entrenched themselves in the inner courtyard of the temple and were hostile to both John and Simon. The city was thus divided into three strongholds that waged continuous war against each other. The streets became a front line, and the inhabitants found themselves hostages of their own defenders. The fighting between the factions was fierce. They used catapults to hurl stones at each other, fought in narrow alleys, and spared no one. John and Simon fought for absolute control, and in this struggle, any means were acceptable. They took food from the townspeople to feed their fighters and eliminated anyone who dared to contradict them. But the most terrible and fateful act was yet to come. In Jerusalem, as in any ancient fortress, huge food reserves had been created in case of a siege. The city's granaries stored grain, oil, and wine, reserves that, according to Josephus, could last for several years of siege. These reserves were the city's main hope. In the heat of their mad struggle for power, the rebel leaders did the unthinkable. First Simon's men, and then John's men in response, set fire to the enemy's food stores. Huge barns filled with grain, rice, and oil burned to the ground. It was an act of utter strategic madness. They destroyed what could have allowed the city to withstand any siege. The motives behind this act are still debated. Perhaps they wanted to deprive the enemy of resources. Perhaps they believed that by destroying the supplies, they would force all the inhabitants of the city to fight with desperate courage, having no way to retreat. Whatever the case, the result was disastrous. Jerusalem lost its main trump card. When Titus approached the city walls, he was besieging not a thriving fortress, but a city doomed to starvation. The defenders were determined, but their fate had been sealed by their own hands. They could still fight, but they could no longer wait. Time was now on the side of the Romans. This internal war had another effect. It completely demoralized the part of the population that still hoped for salvation. Thousands of residents tried to flee the city, but they were caught and returned as traitors. Jerusalem turned into a huge trap, where hunger was to become as terrible an enemy as the Roman legions. Josephus, who watched this from the Roman camp, was horrified. He wrote that the rebels had destroyed with their own hands what the Romans could never have taken by force. When Titus learned of the destruction of the warehouses, he realized that his task had become much easier. He no longer needed to storm the impregnable walls. He just had to wait. If you like how we reveal the hidden sides of great events, don't forget to like this video. Guess how long it took the Roman army to completely cut off a city of 1 million people from the outside world? In the spring of 70, Titus led his legions to the walls of Jerusalem. The sight that met the Romans was awe-inspiring. The city stood on hills, protected on three sides by deep ravines. But its main defense was its walls, three rings of powerful fortifications that were considered impregnable. Titus set up camp on Mount Sculpus, north of the city, which offered a beautiful view of the Temple Mount. The initial plan was to use psychological pressure tactics. Titus lined up all his forces in full battle order, demonstrating the power of his legions, the brilliance of their armor, and their disciplined formation. He hoped that the sight of this indomitable force would make the defenders reconsider and surrender the city. However, this demonstration had the opposite effect. The sight of a common enemy standing at the gates caused the warring factions of John and Simon to temporarily forget their differences. For the first time, they joined forces for a joint sortie. The rebels suddenly attacked the Roman camp, taking the legionaries by surprise and nearly capturing Titus himself. This daring attack showed the Romans that there would be no easy victory. Titus realized that he was dealing with a fanatical enemy who would fight to the last. The psychological pressure had failed. He then resorted to classic Roman siege tactics. The plan was to breach the walls from the north at the weakest point where there were no natural ravines. To this end, Roman engineers began building siege platforms. Thousands of soldiers and engineers set to work. They cut down all the trees in the surrounding area to build embankments on which the siege engines could be rolled up. It was a titanic task, carried out under constant fire from the walls. The defenders of the city, in turn, made desperate sorties, trying to burn down Roman buildings and hinder the work. Soon, Titus faced another problem. Despite the fact that the city was surrounded, small groups of people could still get in, delivering provisions or simply sneaking through the Roman cordons under the cover of night. The siege was incomplete. To finally suffocate the city, Titus made a decision that was astonishing in its scale. He ordered the construction of a continuous siege wall around the entire city of Jerusalem, a circumvallation line. This wall was to completely close the ring and cut off the city from any contact with the outside world. Tens of thousands of legionnaires were thrown into this construction. Working day and night, they erected a wall almost 8 kilometers long. According to reports, the construction of this wall took only 3 days. It was a demonstration of the incredible engineering power and discipline of the Roman army. The wall was reinforced with 13 forts where garrisons were stationed. Now Jerusalem was truly trapped. No one could enter or leave. For the city's inhabitants, this was the beginning of the end. The food shortage caused by the senseless burning of the warehouses was now absolute. Prices for all foodstuffs skyrocketed.
They could be here by night.
The city, cut off from the world by the wall, began to slowly sink into darkness. Meanwhile, Roman engineers completed their siege platforms and rolled battering rams up to the walls. The steel ring was closed, and now the Romans were ready to launch a direct assault. Titus wanted the city, and he was prepared to use the full power of his legions to get it. The walls were closed, but to take the city, the Romans had to face the most advanced engineering of the time. In the next chapter, you will learn about the giant machines that crushed stone and how Roman technology clashed with the desperate ingenuity of the defenders. The Roman army was strong not only because of the discipline of its legionaries, but also because of its unmatched siege engineering. Against the massive walls of Jerusalem, Titus deployed the entire arsenal of the Roman military machine. It was a clash of the most advanced technologies of the era, a battle of engineers in which the fate of the city was at stake. The main striking force was the battering rams. These were not just logs, but complex mechanisms. Huge iron-bound beams were suspended on ropes inside a sturdy wooden frame, resembling a turtle. Dozens of soldiers, protected by this structure, swung the battering ram, delivering monotonous, crushing blows to the same section of the wall. To protect against projectiles and fire from the walls, these siege turtles were covered with special non-combustible materials and water-soaked skins. But the main pride of Roman engineers were siege towers. These were real multi-story fortresses on wheels, often exceeding the height of the city walls themselves. These giant structures slowly rolled up to the walls on specially constructed embankments. Inside the tower were soldiers ready to storm the walls, while the upper platform was equipped with catapults and archers who fired at the defenders on the walls. When the tower got close enough, a bridge was thrown from it, and the legionnaires rushed straight at the enemy fortifications. The defenders of Jerusalem did not sit idly by. They responded with remarkable ingenuity and desperation. Against the battering rams, they used a cushioning tactic. They lowered huge sacks of straw or wool from the walls, trying to catch the head of the battering ram and soften its blows. In response, the Romans had to attach sharp hooks to long poles to cut off these improvised shock absorbers. The most effective defense tactic was sorties. Under cover of night, the rebels broke out of the city and attacked the siege structures, trying to set them on fire. They carried torches and combustible materials, throwing themselves at the Roman machines. Several times they managed to set fire to the giant towers, nullifying weeks of titanic labor by Roman engineers. Another countermeasure was the construction of tunnels. The defenders dug underground passages from the city that led directly under the Roman siege mounds. They either tried to collapse these mounds or place combustible materials in the tunnels and set them on fire, hoping that the fire would destroy the siege engines standing above. This underground warfare was one of the most difficult stages of the siege. The Romans had to dig counter tunnels to intercept the enemy underground. Desperate battles took place in the dark and narrow passages, which were not mentioned in the official reports. Despite the heroic resistance, Roman methodicalness prevailed. After 15 days of siege, the battering rams finally breached the first, outermost wall of the city. It was May 70th. The Romans broke into the suburbs, and the defenders were forced to retreat to the second wall. The second wall was taken after only 5 days of fierce fighting. Titus, perhaps hoping to break the will to resist, made a gesture that was unusual for him. He ordered that this part of the city not be destroyed, trying to show the inhabitants that he was prepared to show mercy if they surrendered. However, the Zealots took advantage of this, launched a counterattack, and drove the Romans back. This temporary success only enraged Titus. He again threw his legions into the attack, and 4 days later, the second wall was finally taken and destroyed. Now the Roman army stood before the last line of defense, the main wall protecting the upper city and the Temple Mount. But first, they had to take the key defensive stronghold, Antonia Fortress. It was a secret known to all commanders. Whoever controlled the Antonia Fortress controlled the temple. This mighty citadel, built by Herod the Great and named after his patron, Mark Antony, towered over the Temple Mount. It was connected to the temple by special passageways and served as both its defense and observation point. The fortress was almost a perfect square, with 4 towers at the corners. It was built on a sheer cliff, making a direct assault virtually impossible. For Titus, capturing Antonia was a priority. Without it, he could not begin the assault on the temple itself, which the rebels had turned into their main stronghold. Roman engineers began construction of 4 new, even more massive siege ramps aimed at the fortress walls. The work was carried out with incredible intensity. Titus understood that the siege was dragging on, and the lack of food in the city was making the defenders increasingly desperate, but no less dangerous. It was at this moment that Titus decided to use psychological warfare again. He used Josephus. The former Jewish commander approached the walls and begged the defenders to surrender in their native language. He appealed to their common sense, describing the indomitable power of Rome and the inevitable destruction that awaited the city. However, Joseph was the worst possible negotiator. To the Zealots, he was not a compatriot, but a traitor, a defector who wore Roman clothes and ate Roman bread. His speeches only provoked fury. Instead of a response, he was showered with ridicule and arrows, and he had to take cover behind the legionnaires' shields. While Joseph unsuccessfully appealed for peace, John of Gauchala, who commanded the defense of Antonia, prepared his response to the Roman engineers. He ordered a tunnel to be dug from the fortress under the place where the Romans were building their embankments. This tunnel was filled with combustible materials and reinforced with wooden supports. When the Roman ramparts were almost ready, the defenders set fire to the supports. The tunnel collapsed, and the ground literally disappeared from under the feet of the Roman soldiers. Huge siege engines and ramparts fell into a fiery abyss. It was a disaster for the Romans and a huge success for the defenders. At the same time, Simon Bar Giorgia's men made a sortie and attacked other Roman mounds, managing to set them on fire as well. In one day, the Roman army lost the fruits of many weeks of labor. It seemed that the defenders' spirit was unbroken, and their ingenuity knew no bounds. Titus was furious. He realized that standard siege methods would not work against such an enemy. He convened a council of war and made a decision to stop building complex machines and switch to a tactic of total exhaustion. He also ordered his legions to begin building a new mound, but this time using stone instead of earth so that it could not be undermined. Work began with renewed vigor. The legionaries worked around the clock, and after 3 weeks, the new stone rampart was ready. The Romans once again rolled their battering rams up to the walls of Antonia. This time, luck was on their side. The wall did not hold, and a breach was formed. At night, a small detachment of Roman legionnaires slipped into the fortress under cover of darkness. A desperate battle ensued in the dark. By morning, after a fierce battle, the fortress of Antonia had fallen. The Romans paid a high price, but now the way to the last stronghold was open. The fortress had fallen, and now nothing stood between the Roman legions and the most sacred place in the city. In the next chapter, you will learn about the fate of the temple. The capture of Antonia Fortress was the beginning of the end. Now the Roman legions and the rebels were face to face, separated only by the Temple Mount. The temple itself, one of the greatest architectural wonders of the ancient world, became the last stronghold. Its mighty outer walls and galleries became the front line. John of Gischala and his men retreated to the inner courtyards of the temple, vowing to defend it to the last. For them, it was no longer just a war for independence, but a holy battle. The Romans, in turn, faced a dilemma. According to Josephus,
the food stores have been completely destroyed.
Destroy the temple.
Patrol
he
the
understood
southern
its
colonnade.
enormous cultural
Watch
and religious
for Romans
significance,
near the Antonia.
and perhaps wanted to preserve it as a symbol of Rome's victory over Judea. Titus held a council of war to discuss what to do next. Some of his commanders insisted on an immediate assault using fire, arguing that as long as the temple stood, the Jewish people would not cease their resistance. Others, including Titus himself, were inclined to try to take the building by storm, but spare it from destruction. It was decided to first try to extinguish the fires that had already started in the galleries. However, in the chaos of battle, orders often lose their force. The fighting for the Temple Mount was incredibly fierce. The legionaries, exhausted by the long siege and enraged by the stubborn resistance, were eager to end the war. They fought in the narrow passages, stairways, and galleries surrounding the main courtyard. Josephus describes how the fateful moment came when one of the Roman soldiers, seized by some divine impulse, grabbed a torch and threw it into one of the windows of the temple building. The dry wooden structures instantly burst into flames. The fire began to spread rapidly throughout the building. Titus, upon learning of the fire, allegedly rushed to the scene and tried to give orders to extinguish the fire. He shouted and gestured, but in the roar of battle and the crackling of the flames, no one listened to him. On the contrary, the soldiers, seeing that the temple was burning, rushed to set fire to it in other places. They were convinced that only the complete destruction of this symbol would end the war. Other historians, such as Suetonius, give a simpler version, claiming that Titus deliberately gave the order for destruction, considering it a military necessity. Regardless of whether it was an order, an accident, or an uncontrolled impulse of the soldiers, the result was the same. The Temple of Jerusalem, the center of the Jewish faith for centuries, was engulfed in flames. The sight was terrifying. The huge building, covered in gold, burned like a giant torch, lighting up the night sky. The gold plates on the walls melted, and the molten metal flowed down the steps. The defenders, seeing their sanctuary perishing, uttered desperate cries and threw themselves with renewed fury at the Roman swords, preferring death in battle. For the Jewish people, this was not just the loss of a building, it was the end of an entire era. The temple was not just a place of worship, it was a place where, according to their faith, God dwelled on earth. Its destruction was a theological catastrophe, an event that overturned all their ideas about the world. Roman legionnaires breaking through inside discovered untold riches accumulated in the temple's treasuries. But their main spoils were sacred objects: the golden menorah, 7-branched candlestick, the table of showbread, and silver trumpets. These trophies would become the main symbol of Titus's victory. By the evening of the 9th of Av in the year 70, by tragic coincidence on the same day that, according to legend, the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, only smoking ruins remained of the great building. The defenders were either killed or pushed back into the last part of the city that still held out, the upper city. With the fall of the temple, organized resistance in Jerusalem effectively ceased. However, the war was not yet over. Rebel leaders, including Simon Bar Giora and John of Gischala, along with the remnants of their fighters, managed to escape from the burning temple and take refuge in the last stronghold, the upper city. The upper city, located on a high hill, was the area where the Jerusalem aristocracy and nobility lived. It was surrounded by its own powerful wall and included Herod's palace, which was itself a first-class fortress. Here, among the luxurious villas and palaces, the Zealots decided to fight their last battle. The Roman legions, intoxicated by their victory on the Temple Mount, were forced to begin, in effect, a new siege. They again began building siege ramps, this time against the walls of the upper city. The work took about 3 weeks. The defenders no longer had the strength or resources for effective sorties or counter-engineering measures. Despair and chaos reigned inside the upper city. Thousands of citizens who had fled here from other areas found themselves trapped along with the rebels. The food shortage, which had already been catastrophic, now reached its peak. The city had exhausted itself. In early September, the Romans launched an assault. Battering rams broke through the walls and legionnaires stormed inside. This time, resistance was minimal. The exhausted and demoralized defenders could no longer stand up to the fresh and well-organized Roman troops. What followed was a methodical operation to establish control over the city. Roman soldiers advanced from house to house, suppressing the last pockets of resistance. The city, which had held out for almost 5 months, fell. Titus gave the order to raze Jerusalem to the ground. The victory in Judea was not just another military campaign, it was an event that established the new Flavian dynasty in power. Emperor Vespasian and his sons, Titus and Domitian, needed to make a statement. And so they staged one of the most lavish triumphs the Eternal City had ever seen. In 71 AD, a grand procession passed through the streets of Rome. At its head rode Vespasian and Titus, dressed in the purple robes of triumphators. They were followed by senators, magistrates, and all the Roman nobility. The city rejoiced, welcoming the emperors who had brought peace after a long civil war. The central part of the triumph was the display of trophies. The Romans carried models of captured cities, battle scenes, and huge quantities of gold, silver, and valuable fabrics captured in Judea on special platforms. But the main spectacle that caught everyone's attention was the treasures of the Jerusalem temple. Legionnaires proudly carried on their shoulders the gilded table of showbread, silver trumpets, and, most importantly, the giant golden menorah, a 7-branch candelabrum that had become the main symbol of the fallen nation. These items, hitherto hidden from the eyes of non-Jews, were now on public display as proof of the victory of the Roman gods over the God of Judah. Prisoners were led behind the trophies. Thousands of the strongest and most beautiful Jewish young men and women walked in chains, destined to be sold in slave markets. But the main exhibit was Simon Bar Giora. As the chief enemy, he was paraded throughout the city and then, according to ancient custom, taken to the forum, where he awaited execution. John of Gischala was sentenced to life imprisonment. Roman propaganda claimed that Judea had been wiped off the face of the earth. Indeed, only ashes and the camp of the ex-legion remained in Jerusalem. The region's economy was completely destroyed, and the population was scattered. The campaign had achieved its goal. The uprising had been suppressed with unprecedented cruelty. However, history has shown that wiping out a nation is much more difficult than destroying a city. Rome destroyed the physical center of the Jewish faith, the temple. But it was this catastrophe that triggered a fundamental transformation that allowed Jewish culture and religion to survive and be reborn. With the disappearance of the temple, sacrifices ceased, and the power of the Sadducee priests became a thing of the past. Leadership passed to the sages and teachers, the rabbis. They focused on what could not be burned or carried away in a triumphal procession: the text, the law, and prayer. Temple Judaism was replaced by Rabbinic Judaism, which we know today. The synagogue became the center of religious life, and the main act of worship was the study of sacred texts and prayer. Faith became portable. It could be practiced in any corner of the world where a community gathered. Thus, Rome's attempt to destroy Judaism by depriving it of its heart had the opposite effect. It made it decentralized and flexible, capable of surviving without land and without a state. The destruction of Jerusalem was not the end, but the beginning of a long and difficult journey of the diaspora. The events of 70 AD also had a huge impact on Christianity, which was emerging at that time. According to tradition, the Christian community of Jerusalem left the city even before the siege began, which deepened its rift with the Jewish majority. The destruction of the temple strengthened Christians in their belief that their teaching was a new covenant that had replaced the old one. For the Roman Empire, this war was a demonstration of its power, but also an indication of its limits. Judea remained a restless province. Just 60 years later, a new, even more desperate uprising led by Bar Kokhba would break out, leading to the second and final expulsion of the Jews from their land. We have gone through the smoke and ashes of one of the most tragic sieges in history. The fall of Jerusalem is not just a military victory for Rome. It is a profound drama about how internal division, fanaticism, and the struggle for power can destroy a city and a people faster than any external enemy. This event forever changed 3 world religions and determined the course of history for millennia to come. The Romans wiped the city off the map, but they could not destroy the memory and faith that were only strengthened in the fire. The story of Titus, John, Simon, and Josephus is an eternal reminder of the fragility of civilization and the terrible price that must be paid for the inability to agree in the face of common misfortune. What other great battle do you think changed the world and deserves our detailed analysis? Suggest topics for future videos you would like to see in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new journeys into the great past.